because yeah, you probably will need to copy some commands into your terminal while I'm rambling, really. So yeah. And if you don't have them, oh wait, okay, that's fine. We have time. We have 2 hours together. Or if you don't want, you can also leave. I won't blame you. So yeah, so well, like I said, before we begin, or while I'm talking, that's basically like a list of instructions to do, to basically compile PHP onto your own machine, and prepare it so that we can actually do an extension afterwards. So yeah, so who am I? So I'm Gina Banyard. I study pure mathematics at Imperial College London. I've been working on PHP since 2018. I initially started with the documentation. Actually, I started with the French translation of the documentation, moved to the English one, saw a bunch of weird stuff that PHP was doing, and I was like, maybe it shouldn't do that. And then, yeah, start writing my first RFC and like PHP contributions in 2019. And since April 2022, I'm one of the first batch of people that are paid by the PHP Foundation, which I'm very grateful for, who allow me and other developers to work on PHP to maintain it and fix bugs and do stuff. So if you or your company funds PHP via the PHP Foundation, thank you. If not, maybe try to talk to your company, especially if you use PHP as your primary business or in your tech stack. Because as of now, there are only about 10 people who are paid to work on PHP, and not all of them are full-time. And PHP is a complicated project, which has a lot of moving parts, like I will show. So any help is appreciated, be that by contributions or be that financially. So yeah, for the new people who got into the thing, I'll just go back. You can find the slides of the talk at this link. Also, this is going to be somewhat practical towards the end. So if you have a laptop, do take it out. If not, you can just hear me ramble. So different ways of contributing to PHP. So there's the PHP documentation that you can contribute. There's also the php.net website that you can contribute to. There are writing and improving tests for PHP and like extensions. There are Peckel extensions, which are not bundled with PHP, but like you can find. I have an extension which is called CSV, which is not really maintained anymore, mainly and not finished. But it's like a long-working pet project, as all pet projects go. And then there are bundle extensions, which are the extensions that you find within the PHP SRC repo. For example, curl, or a lot of the database drivers are in there. And then there's PHP itself. So yeah. The PHP documentation is written in XML, and it follows the docbook standard, which is widely used. I should maybe have done an asterisk, because it follows mostly the docbook standard, meaning that we cannot actually use dedicated tooling for it, which is sometimes a bit annoying, but there were reasons as to why it was done this way. The English language sources are available on GitHub, so everything is open source. The docs are actually under Creative Commons, so if you just don't like how the PHP website looks, you could actually technically download them and do your own renderer. This is also how Zend is now in charge of the PHP 4 and PHP 5 legacy documentation, because the main documentation only covers PHP 7 and upwards. So yeah, to keep it reasonable managed so that we don't lose our minds trying to like edit documentation and cover 3 major versions, which can be a bit of a challenge. There's a tutorial on how to contribute on the doc.php.net website. Doc without an S. We have a subdomain which has an S, which brings you just to the website, just which is updated faster. Reasons. And yeah, it's also possible to contribute to some of the existing translations. So we have French, we have German, Polish, which is out of date, Spanish, which is really out of date. So if you speak Spanish, please let me know, because I will gladly get you up and running. Italian, Ukrainian, Russian, simplified Chinese, Japanese, Romanian, Brazilian Portuguese, that's the other big one, and German. I think I've covered them all here. So yeah, and then one of the last pieces is like this doc-base repo, which basically handles a bunch of the configuration files and everything, which yeah prepares the manual to be actually able to like render it. Now, the docs have a very peculiar way they need to actually be formatted. They actually need this, the structure to be like base, en for the language, and then like fr. It's basically the git repo, just without the doc dash, because configure just works with hard-coded paths everywhere, which apparently is an issue on Windows, I've discovered last week, after somebody's tried compiling or rendering stuff. So yeah, so that's also something that you can actually contribute and trying to improve. But yeah. So the manual is rendered via our custom renderer written in PHP, and it's named PhD, probably because you need a PhD to actually understand the code base. Like, I've been working on it for 4 years, I've barely got a grasp on it, because it's peak 2006 code. Like, it's arrays everywhere, like closures names with strings, which actually mean method names, and it's wonderful. It's very fun to like actually start digging and trying to like add support for stuff. So yeah, it handles like indexing, search, and automatic linking for our like the function class names and method name tags, which have in the documentation, which allow to like easy cross-linking. Sadly, we have no support for constant, but like a couple of us are working on trying to get this running, because it would kind of be nice to have, you see a constant in a documentation and be like, oh, I don't know what it does, and you can click on it, and it brings you to the definition of the constant. Yeah, stuff like this. The command is very long on how to render it, because the indexing takes a ton of memory, and I don't think doesn't free it. So you just need to just allocate a bunch and hope it works. Which is my strategy, or you just run it twice. So yeah, so the PHP.net website. So the website is also open source, and it can actually be found again on the PHP Git repo, which is called web-php. And that contains the CSS for the whole website and the rendered documentation. Like, I know some people find the website to be kind of old-looking and not very pretty and stuff like that. So that's kind of the place. I know various people have recently started working on a new style, I think, as far as I know. So Paul Dragonis, who's also speaking and who was like the MC, or half of the MC, is actually working on part of the styling. So yeah, I think that's also if like that's something that you have an opinion, maybe you want to contribute. I am not super active on web PHP. I don't really understand it because it's surprisingly web stuff. But yeah, so that's another way that you can actually contribute to the PHP project as a whole. Tests, all the time tests. So yeah, so PHP and its extensions are tested via a special file format, which is called PHPT, which stands for PHP test. Very clever. So these files are formatted in a way which is described on the PHP QA website. QA website that I think we are trying to sunset and move a lot of this documentation into the main repo, because it used to be used a lot for, if you ever compile PHP manually and you do like a make test, at the end it will do, it's like, oh, if you have test failures, it's like, oh, you have test failures, do you want to send this report to the project? And the QA website basically handled this. The problem is like nowadays nobody really reads those reports. So yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, but there are still details which are relevant to actually like writing tests, because that's still like not moved. You can actually find code coverage for PHP and bundled extensions on CodeCurve. Handy linking there, and you can then observe how certain extensions have 10% code coverage. So if you knew Postgres and you want to improve code coverage, please do, because we don't have much. Curl would be also a good candidate if you know Curl. Curl is always massive and has new options and new flags and new stuff, which we don't really test. So we will update the constants and so that you can actually use them on modern version of PHPs, but we don't actually test that they work, because we just trust that like curl is actually well implemented, which usually is fine, but then sometimes there are still bugs in PHP. One handy feature that like what tests do is like if one of the tests fails, you get like a .sh file rendered. Well, you get when a test fails, you get various files which get created. You get like a .php file, which is the actually file that got run, so you can run it yourself. You get like a file which tells you what the expected output is, was like what you actually have, a log, what is the diff between both of the expected and the current output, and just like a global out file, which gives you the whole dump of what actually the test executed. And yeah, and that SH file allows you to rerun the command, but the handy thing is that like after you invoke the SH file, you can use GDB as an argument, and this will like launch the test within GDB. So if you actually need to do like see some debugging within the C code, it's just a very nice and easy way to just get started with GDB as if you don't know how to use it, which is sometimes still my case, because it turns out GDB is very complicated and feature complete. So yeah. So peckled and bundled extensions, those are mostly written in C and C++. I think some people have kind of did some Rust bindings. I don't know, maybe there are Go bindings, I'm not. Rust, I know they exist, and I think some people have actually done Rust extensions. I think Datadog, their PHP extension, which hooks into it, is actually written in Rust. But actually, most functionality that you use in PHP is actually provided by an extension. So like curl is one of the extensions, xstandard, which contains all of the string functions, all of the mass functions, all of the array functions. They're all like that. And also opcache is actually an extension. It's not actually part of the engine. So yeah. And extensions allow you to do more stuff in general than what you can do in userland, such as overloading operators or overloading casting behaviors or comparison operators. And also, you could do proper read-only properties before you had read-only in like in userland, and various things like this, which you can still do. Or you can also bypass standard behavior if you want to, but please don't. I mean, some people love doing that, and it tears my head out. But you know, whatever rocks your boat. So yeah, so PHP itself then, also known as the Zend engine, initially because it was written by Zend, and the name just stuck for the moment, and I don't think it will ever change. PHP 8 is actually on version 4 of the Zend engine, and so that is written in C, and it has multiple parts, so the compiler, the Lexer, and the AST, which actually takes your PHP code and compiles it into something that the VM can actually like interpret and run, and it compiles them into different opcodes, which is the instructions, basically. It also has the optimizer. That is actually now within PHP, within the engine. Before it was, prior to 8.1, I think, or 8.0, it was actually part of opcache, which led to like some complications sometimes at times. But the other thing which is more approachable is engine APIs that you can use for extensions. So ZPP is the very common one, which stands for Zend Pass Parameters. So this is the way how in the C code, you will pass parameters passed to a function that you provide that users will give arguments to. So yeah. Resources to write C for PHP. The first link is like the main thing that you will need to use. Trust me, I use it every single day. Heap.space is what is like an LXR, which basically means it does code explorations. So you can just search the whole code base for like a definition with like wildcards, and it will try and find you the definitions. It can find your usages in the tests. And this is also the way how you can actually find the definition of stuff, because the PHP code base is not very well organized because it is 27 years old. So stuff has been sometimes a bit chucked around in ways to get it to compile, and it's not very easy to find stuff. Just recently, I've learned that our definition of what a Zend class is, so all of the structures, like the properties and everything, is actually in a very global header, which is called Zend.h, which has loads of stuff. And I was kind of surprised. I would have imagined it to be somewhere else. But yeah, so it's very like the main tool to use to actually find your way around the code base. PHP Internals book is a book that was written by Nikita Popov, I think Larry Morrison, and Julien Pauli. back at the early stage of like PHP 7. It's still the main resource, really, which is still updated and that we use and like still publish stuff, which is very helpful to understand stuff under the hood, to have explanations. But it's missing some bits. Bits which are usually completed by the Zend tutorial. So this tutorial/book about how to write PHP extensions was written by Dmitry Stogov, who's the person who wrote Opcache initially and who wrote the 2 JIT compilers and who did like a lot of the performance improvements for PHP 7 and who's been working on PHP for 20 years. So he knows his stuff. So yeah, that's also a good resource. phpinternals.net can be convenient. I don't use it that much. Like I said, I prefer to just start digging into the source via heap.space. But mainly because it's like mostly based on PHP 7.2, what the engine API looked like. Most of the engine API is still the same between 7.2 and 8.4, actually. It's not that much of a dramatic change, but there still has been some changes in various structures and everything, so it can be a bit outdated. But so that was written by Thomas Weinhardt, and he has another Git repo, which is extension samples, where every branch he does is one specific thing to do an extension. For example, operator overloading, or adding some methods, or read-only properties and everything. So that's a very convenient way also to like learn about and try, and it's basically exercises in its own way. Now for any and all repos, helping with issue triage is something that you can do. I spend about 1/3 of my time doing issue triage and code review. It takes a lot of time, especially when you have bugs which are not really easy to reproduce or validate, because it's basically just like, yeah, my project has this problem. And it's like, do you have a reproducible? No. Here's a Docker image which takes an hour to run, and you get the error. It's not very helpful for us to actually get to the root cause to try and fix it. So even just confirming that you are also hitting the issue can be very helpful to know. It's like, oh, okay, this is a problem that other people are encountering. Or simplifying reproducible. If you have like a reproducible which is smaller, that can always be helpful. So yeah, that's like one of the main things. And I think finally, on internals, so the internals mailing list and IFCs. So PHP is governed by IFCs in a certain way. Those are like the proposals where people want to be like, oh, I want to deprecate this, or I want to propose this feature, or I want to amend this feature. And all of this goes through the internals mailing list. And it's a mailing list. It has an etiquette. The main one is like no top posting. So if you write an email, usually by one-to-one correspondence, your reply will be above the other people's reply. That's what's called top posting. Bottom posting is if you flip the order. So you take the reply from the person you're replying to, the content above, and then you cut out the things that are like not needed, and you've just replied to the points which are relevant. This makes it easier for us to like parse an email, and it's just easier to just organize stuff, because the mailing list is sent out, well, plenty of people read it. Like, you're just sending an email, and loads of people will read it. If you don't want to be subscribed to the mailing list because you don't want to be bombarded by emails, which is totally understandable, but still want to like keep track of what's happening on internals, there's a website which is called externals.io that you can use to search prior discussions before you're thinking about maybe doing something, to just know what's happened, but also just to keep track of like what is actually happening on the mailing list. The PHP IFC Codex is also a good repo, which was done by Danak, who has a summary of discussions of various IFCs, ideas, and how to behave also on the mailing list in general to reduce friction with core developers. And I will say, writing an IFC takes time, and it can be exhausting. It's technical writing It's technical writing more so than just documentation. It's like you're writing to be like, okay, here are the current issues, here's what you're trying to fix, why is my proposed idea the best way forward, which can be very draining. And discussions around AFCs can be exhausting for that reason. because sometimes you think it's the best idea ever, and then somebody else comes to you and be like, no, I don't think so. And it sometimes can't be, sometimes people won't motivate their reasoning as well, which can be frustrating. And the last thing I will say is like, know your audience. If you like replying to somebody on internals, try to see maybe who they are, like look how often they post, or like who they stand in the community. It is sometimes jarring when you see somebody new on the list, start replying to long-time core contributors in a way which makes them feel like you're just a random person. Like we had somebody reply to Nikita Popov, who used to work for JetBrains, and before like he worked for like 9 years, I think maybe 10 years, like on PHP, and like at the end have somebody who's like, yeah, I disagree, or I don't think this is good, or whatever. It's like, okay, maybe listen to somebody, or like try to understand why they disagree with you, or like what they're doing, instead of just randomly typing all the time. But the second thing was know your audience. It's sometimes to know that the people you're replying to are not actually core developers. They're just other developers that like participate on the mailing list. It doesn't mean their opinion is not valuable, but it's not the opinion of a core developer. The main reason why they're not that much, like why as core developers we don't always go onto the mailing list and reply is that, I don't know if you've replied to an email or drafted an email, it can take a lot of time, especially if your email is trying to explain why this one-liner idea doesn't work, and you need to go into intricate details, and that takes you an hour to write. Like I have written replies to IFCs, which have, or like to an email on the mailing list, which has taken me 2 hours to draft. Because I need to go through like details and explain and note this is not how it works, or you're being you have a misconception about something. So yeah, that's sometimes why you won't get replies from core developers. It doesn't mean that like if you don't have an idea, don't contribute, like, and don't shout it into the void. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But it's more to like know. It can sometimes get heated, and it's not necessarily because we don't like you or stuff. But it's like there might be reasons as to why that happens overall. So yeah. So the idea of what we work on after I've rambled for, check notes, 30 minutes nearly, holy hell, is basically a small C extension, which is to create an extension that provides the rational numbers. So in math terms, it's Q. So yeah, which is basically a fraction. So if you have like a number above a numerator and a denominator. So yeah, like I said, having the slides here would probably be helpful, except if you want to start typing the commands. For the people who just came into the room, let me know if you want to go back to the beginning. To like be how it should be structured initially for the compile. But yeah, so hopefully, if you do this set of instructions, you'll have an extension which actually works and compiles. And that's more like the interactive bit. So yeah, if you don't have a laptop, I'm sorry, I should have maybe clarified to bring a laptop. So yeah, but yeah, otherwise, that's more the moment where like, I hope you want to get hands-on. If you don't want to actually work on writing a C extension, if you're more keen on wanting to write tests or wanting to write documentation, do let me know. I will happily help you to get up to speed and do that as well. Like the whole idea of this workshop is doing something that you find interesting to try to contribute to PHP. Now I do think maybe people like the most daunting bit is trying to write C code, and the whole objective here is to like show you that it's somewhat approachable. It's not like the worst thing ever. So yeah. Do let me know roughly when you're ready. I don't know, like maybe I may be asking like 2 minutes. So yeah. And I might steal some water. Also, does everybody have the slides? Just a checking, not knowing if people came in later or not. Okay, cool, brilliant. Who has not gotten PHP compiled, who has a computer? Okay, cool. Has everybody gotten the extension generated and running and? Nope. Did you get an error message or something or? Ah, yes. Yeah, the tool chain can be a bit tedious to get installed. No, that's fine. Usually, I don't like. Normally, like a minimal, like the command gives you a minimal build of PHP, which should roughly get you up started. If anybody else has issues with the stuff or not, okay, I will then move to the next slide. And worst case, if not, just raise your hand and I'll come in. So hopefully it works. It run and it compiled, and you got like 3 tests that got generated, and it's all green. So yeah, idea would be to look around the files of the generated extension skeleton. There are mainly 2 things that are, I think, worthwhile to look at, which is the rationals.c, which actually contains the meat of the extension. Rationals.stub.php, which is actually how you define stuff using PHP syntax, which is something new since PHP 8, which does make it way simpler to actually write PHP classes or PHP methods or functions in general, because it generates the header, which is called rationals_arginfo, which is what the engine actually uses to register your functions and with all of the type declarations and default property, default name, the variable name and the default values and everything. And then there's the test folder where all of the tests reside. And you have which use the PHP format, so you can maybe look at this and how it works. So yeah. So let's define our class. So you can just add the rational number class to the stub file. And you can create a test which checks that the class exists. Either you just instantiated, do, I don't know, variable O equals new rational number without any parameters. And you can just do execute make test. And what it should happen is that it should actually generate the arginfo, so it will regenerate the arginfo header with the class. And it will do make and, make which will compile and then make test. Now, this should fail because you actually haven't registered the class yet. So the arginfo file will now, if you look at it, will now have a function which is called register class rational number that you need to actually call within the C file. So within the rational, within the rationals.c file. However, to register the class, we needed to store the class entry somewhere. I will also start using CE from now on, class entry CE. Hopefully that's not that dramatic. So yeah, so within the C file, usually we put it at the top. You add this static Zend class entry, asterisk, and then the name of whatever you want to call the CE. So I use Zend_C_rational number. So yeah, so the star means that this is a pointer in C, scary words, which basically means this is the address of something. The PHP equivalent would be a reference, roughly. But yeah, hopefully everything should work fine. So yeah. So to actually we stored it somewhere, but now we need to actually define it. So PHP, an extension has multiple phases where it gets loaded. So there is the global initialization phase, which is called ginit, which is when the module gets loaded into PHP at the beginning. You have minute, which is when how do I describe this? Because I always get confused as well here. It's when the module is being initialized. So most of the time, this is once per request. But for example, for FPM, as far as my understanding goes, it's like a minute will happen once before all of the process nodes generate all of their own stuff. And the next phase is R-init, which stands for request init, so which is like every time you actually get a request in. And that's the opposite, like for destructuring, basically. So the PHP underscore minute underscore function macro will basically just prepare everything that you need to generate the name, convention, everything with rationals. And then you take the pointer that we defined as static earlier, like in the previous slide, and we make it equal to the register class rational number. And then we return success because, well, there was nothing to fail our initialization. So success and failure are two. It's basically a Boolean pair that has a value as -1 for failure and 0 for success, meaning it's the opposite of a standard Boolean. So across the code base, so this is called a Zend result type, which has success and failure. So you will see this across the code base where it's like, oh, it returns a Zend result to tell you it's failure or success instead of a Boolean, but we do mix and match. So it can be a bit confusing sometimes when you go around and tracking the correct type. But yeah, and so then obviously to actually declare that we have this initialization module, like function, we modify the rationals module entry to have this minute thing to just declare it. So now if you actually rerun the test and compile, it should work and tell you it's like, oh, the class is defined and everything. So yeah. Now, a rational number which doesn't have any numbers is not very useful, isn't it? So how I went about this is like, so for me in the stub file, I added 2 properties typed with integer, and I've named them numerator and denominator, but you can name them how you want. You will hopefully adapt to it just fine. So yeah, so this is how we'll start, like how to declare a method. So the PHP method macro takes as its first argument the class name, and as its second argument the method name. So yeah, and then you actually go into the main C body of the function. Zendlong is the type of our integers within the engine. So if you're on 64-bit, it's a 64-bit integer. If you're on 32 bits, it's a 32-bit integer. Yeah. Zend parse parameters is, I find it kind of clear what it does. It passes the parameters which are given to the function. And it has a start and an end, and then a bunch of params type that it does. To note, the values at the start of Zend parameter start, like within the bracket, the first value is the number of minimum arguments that your function or method requires. The second one is the amount of, like, maximum amount of arguments it takes. So we don't have any optional arguments here. So I just put like 2 and 2. If you would want to have like the denominator to be 1 by default, you could add an equal 1 to the denominator that we defined in the C file, and then make it 1 and 2, but also you would need to use like a Z_optional macro that is in between the 2 Zenparam longs that you would be passing. So yeah. So obviously we have the values that we pass from the constructor, but we're not setting them anywhere. They just, if you don't do anything, it's like, okay, I'm passing values, cool, but it sets, like if you would var dump the object, it would still be uninitialized. So how do we get like our instance of our object? So Zendis is this convenient macro which just gives us this, the value like you would do in PHP. And so this is a zval type. The zval stands for Zend value, which is the wrapper type that covers every single value in the engine. You will see this a lot It will be your best friend or your worst enemy. I don't know. But you will see it a lot. And the definition, it's a wrapper which has like some flags, and it wraps the underlying Zend value, which can either be an integer, a double, a string, an array, an object, a resource, although we're trying to get rid of them. A reference is also its special kind. And they are all marked by a type class, which has like an is underscore long, is underscore double. Maybe I should note, in the C world, we use long for integers and doubles for floats, because the normal float type in C is actually a 32-bit float instead of a 64-bit float, so it's double the precision. It's weird, like, C stuff. But yeah, so the engine provides an API, which allows us to update a property, which takes the class entry as its first argument, the object that we're trying, the Zend object that we're trying to actually like modify, and then it takes the name of the parameter, like the property on the class, as a C string, and it takes the length of this C string. Mainly because, so in PHP, you can just always query the length. In C, we actually need to like carry this information around. So the built-in Zend string structure carries this information around with you, but here we need to manually provide it, and we'll just do it that way. And then you just update both properties with your values. And so if you run the test, it should work. You can add stuff and like var dump it, and you'll get the proper values. However, there's one thing which doesn't really make sense, is 0 as a denominator. You can't divide by 0. So we'll just add like an if check before you set the values, and be like, okay, so if the denominator is equal to 0, well, throw a value error. So Zend argument value error is also an API provided by the engine, which takes as its first argument the argument or the parameter number, and then the second is like a message that you want it to be, as in like a printf format. So for example, if you wanted to have cannot be another number, and you just don't want to like do different if states, you could have like %d and then pass like the number as a follow-up parameter, just like how you would do with like printf or sprintf in PHP. And then return throws is, again, a macro that provided by the engine that actually checks that you're actually throwing an exception. Is everybody fine here, on track? Is everything being okay? Not too fast, not too slow? Cool. So suppose this is the part where you can go as wild as you want or not, and maybe start walking around, which is to actually add some methods to this object so that we can do stuff with it. So you can add like an add method to the stub, and as the argument, you're going to be taking another rational number. So for that, we have the zparam object of class, which checks that like the object you're given is actually of this class, which takes the Zend object pointer, and then the Zend C rational number. By Zend object pointer, what I mean is that it's the variable where you want it to store in the C code. If you want to be more fancy and try something more complicated, you could do the zparam object of class or along if you want to support adding just integers to a rational number. And then do like some if checks to know if you actually have a Zend class, like if you actually have an object or if you have an integer. The other thing to know is that every single function, thus method in PHP, actually returns a value. And this value is initialized to null at the beginning of the function within the macro that you can use and you can access to it, which is kind of this magic variable which exists within function code. You can just pass it around and initialize it. So we want to initialize the return value to be like another object. So we use the object init x method, engine API. The reason for x, it means like extra or extended. is that the normal, like the short version, just would initialize an object of class, SCD class, which is not really useful here. So yeah. So you could use so you can use the Zend read property API to like actually read the property, and then to access the value of the pointer that you get back, the zval from the Zend return property. You can use the z underscore lval underscore p of the pointer to access the zval. So hopefully here it's like you might start using this and look on heap.space to see how it works and how it looks, just to like get you a bit familiar around. So yeah. Also the nomenclature is like z underscore means zval of something, lval means okay, this is like an integer that we're dealing with, and the underscore p at the end means like, oh, I'm dealing with a zval pointer. If you're not dealing with a zval pointer, you could just drop the underscore p and just access the thing directly. So yeah, these are all like macros which wrap and help to access the underlying value. So yeah. And if you've done that, you can, oh right, yeah, I suppose you could like add some other methods. So did I do it the wrong way around? Okay, the 2 slides should be the other way around. So yeah, and then you can add like more methods, like subtraction, multiplication, modulo, take the absolute value of a rational number, exponentiation, where x is an integer. So yeah, I suppose I'll maybe let you work a bit, or and if you have problems or you need help, let me know. So yeah. I walk around actually just to like know.